1955, Ernie Banks, playing for the inept Chicago Cubs, had a WAR of 8.2, highest of any NL shortstop. His 44 home runs and 117 RBI constituted 26.8 and 19.6% respectively of the Cubs team total. Meanwhile, Snyder of the world champion Dodgers was responsible for 20.9% and 18.5% of Brooklyn's offense. Yet his WAR was 8.6. Go figure!
I can't. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole, and of course I know that was kind of a long-winded cartoon, but it really is setting up the whole theme for today's program about the war and trying to understand it, and it's confusing numbers and it's confusing formulas and how it's had an impact on really major awards and players either entering the Hall of Fame or being slighted. And we'll talk about that here on Park Ridge Sports History. And I'm going to right now give a special shout out to Howard Fredericks because I do have some pictures I'd like to show later on, but I wasn't able to print them out on my computer. But I do have enough because I would like to take an involved look at Ernie Banks and the frustration of war. And of course, I'm not going to give you the formula for war because, to be perfectly honest, I still have problems wrapping my arms fully around it because just when I think I know it, a couple of numbers or a wrench gets thrown into the works when I am confounded about it. And hopefully I'll remember to do this in the show to particularly talk about a current ball player today, Marcus Seaman, played for Oakland and last year with Toronto. I'd like to talk about his WAR over the last 3 years and also delve into the pitching seasons of three or four pitchers, 3 of whom are in the Hall of Fame, and one who had a career year in 1990. And I'm talking about Bob Welch, Steve Carlton, Bob Gibson, and Roger Clemens. All right, but before I get to that, I want to just talk about last night's football game. And this has to do with war. And it has to be part of the element of when the scouts really understand a player's wealth. And that is really what war is about. And it's a special shout out. It is relatively a new metric, maybe the last 15, 20 years, that it really has really tagged itself into baseball analysis and to the formulas that, let's say, the front offices use. And it really goes back to, I have to always give a shout out to Bill James because he was really the guy who put baseball analytics. And, you do have other sports writers who really were at the beginnings of this, but it was really Bill James who really brought it to the attention of not just the baseball fan, but also the baseball writers and the front offices, where they really started to look and say, you know what, I think this guy might be onto something. And the one guy who really, during the time that Bill James first came out with his baseball analytics in the early 80s, was a guy by the name of Gene Tennis. And Tennis has many of, if you are have a real understanding of analytics, Gene Tennis has really become I think a symbol of analytics, because when he first came up, he was, saddled with, or lucky to be, that all depends on your understanding, but he came up through the Oakland system. They had some great ball players, Oakland. They had Catfish, a Hall of Famer, Reggie, a Hall of Famer, probably an underrated player in Sal Bando. They had a very good shortstop in Campy Campaneris. A catcher who goes on to be an excellent pitching coach for the Cardinals and the A's in Dave Duncan. Joe Rudy, really good ball player. And then they had parts that just were brought together to make the A's the dominant team, really, of the 70s. I know everyone, including myself, loved to point to the Reds, but it really was the A's. 3 world championships in a row. 5 divisional titles, and 3 pennants. Pretty tough to duplicate. Anyway, I'm going off on a deep end. Gene Tennis, of course, comes to the national platform by subbing for Reggie in the 72 World Series, because Reggie did get hurt in the Game 5 of the AL Championship against Detroit, basically scoring the winning run. Not basically, he does score the winning run in Game 5. And on that play, ripped his hamstring and was unable to perform against the Reds. Every Red fan was like, wow, we got lucky. It turned out to be just the reverse, as Tennis would hit 4 home runs, 2 in the first game, and really propel himself into the national spotlight. That particular series gets Tennis more playing time. And this is where I'm going. He drew a lot of walks. He could hit the long ball, but he had a low batting average. But people start to understand about getting on base. Moneyball is all about that. Does the guy get on base? And Gene Tennis would be a ball player that Earl Weaver would love. And I love Earl Weaver because he has one of the best quotes about maybe people's talents that you can apply to any realm, any job, any career that you're ever in. And he reportedly one time told his coaches, don't tell me what a player can't do. Tell me what he can do. And of course, Weaver in 79 weaved his magic to lead the Orioles to 79, but basically having a makeshift outfield. He did have Jim Palmer, of course. He did have Eddie Murray, and he did have a great MVP candidate in Ken Singleton, who to this day I thought should have been the MVP of 1979. But that's another thing that we're going to get into with the war and all the rest of it. Anyway, make a long story short, Tennis is seen and would be seen today as a metrics superstar because he draws walks, he hits home runs, he has a high on-base percentage, and he does all the little things to make players or make the team better. Now, why do I talk about this? Well, first, this is what I'm talking about. Here's where it applies to the NFL. I was watching the game last night, and I was rooting for the Packers. But I knew the Packers were going to lose right before the half. And it's really comes down to one play, and I'm hoping, I haven't really watched any of the TV today, but I really hope that the analysts are picking up on what I saw last night. Last night, all right, the 49ers got stopped on an interception at the goal line, basically at the goal line by Green Bay. They had the ball with 56 seconds left in the first half, about at the 5-yard line. Aaron Rodgers under center. Packers only have 1 timeout. 49ers have 3. They run the ball up the gut, first play, trying to, I guess, waste time. I immediately said to myself, I hope the Niners are calling timeout. They have nothing to lose here, because if they can stop them on 3 timeouts, they get the ball back maybe with 20 seconds, and they can run it into field goal position again and maybe steal 3 points. Well, when they took timeout, I think the Packers did change their play. And on the next play, Rodgers is forced out of the pocket. It looked like he was going to run, but he finds the open Aaron, I want to get his name right, Aaron Jones from UTEP. And he was a running back in the game, and he had some big yards in the game. He catches a bomb from Aaron Rodgers, and he catches the ball. He made an outstanding catch, by the way, because he kind of had to reverse his body, make the catch. He turned. Now, I don't know whether he lost kind of where he was, but he begins to run. Now, here's what I mean about players having game smarts. And I'm not knocking Aaron Jones. He had a great catch. He's a great athlete. He's a good player. He had some solid plays last night. I'm not saying that, but he turns in to the field of play instead of reversing and trying to stay on the sidelines. He did gain an extra 20 yards or so on the play and turned it from, let's say, a 50-yard pass into 75. But here's my whole point. He turned in instead of running down the sidelines and saying, okay, if I get pushed, I'll go out of bounds. I'll stop the clock because we only have 1 timeout left. Unfortunately, he cut in. and was tackled on the field of play at about the 12-yard line. Green Bay had to waste a timeout to set up. And then on the ensuing play, of course, you saw what happened. Rodgers on first down gets sacked, almost lost the football, I do believe, almost lost the football, but gets sacked. Then they have to ground the ball. And then on third down with about 3 seconds left, they attempt to kick a field goal. And instead of being, let's say, 10 yards closer, 10 yards farther away, and you can see that it was a very low projection on the kick, and it's blocked. And instead of, here's the thing, even if the Packers, here's the wildest thing I really do believe. If the Packers had to kick the ball away, they might have escaped the 3 points surrendered, or maybe even a touchdown surrender. So they're still up 7-0. But it changed the whole course. That block kick, it gave new life to the 49ers. Because I got to be very honest with you, I didn't think Rodgers had a great game last night. I thought many of his passes were kind of wobbly. A couple were in the ground. All the rest of it. I know it's cold and all the rest of it. And everybody has a flat game. That's what I'd like to say. I thought Rodgers had a flat game. Not a bad game, just a flat game. Make a long story even longer. Even if the Packers didn't score, they still would have been up 7, which they were. But the blocked kick, field goal, gave impetus, new life to the 49ers. And you could see they were down after that catch. And all Aaron Jones had to do was just run, tiptoe down the sidelines. If he gets forced out, actually what he probably could have done was, instead of turning in, once he made the catch for 50 yards, maybe he could have run out of bounds. But he did have a long thing. So that's why I'm saying I don't think he got confused when he kind of had to twist his body and come back. He definitely cuts in instead of staying on the sidelines. This is what I mean about players being aware of situation, time, and timeouts. Because nobody's going to help you in that situation. You got to know that you only have one timeout. And I know but you have to have all this coursing through your brain prior to any play and say to yourself, hey, if I get open and I run, we still have a timeout. So I got to stay on the sideline. It was a good football game. It was great. It was played in the snow, 0-degree temperature, or that's what it felt like. You could see the smoke coming out. I wish I had turned differently for the Packers and they win the game, because it would have been great to see maybe I'm not sure whether Green Bay was going to have the home field advantage anyway, but would be great to always see those games. Those are classics. And I know many people were probably bored by the fact there wasn't a lot of scoring. I saw it as, wow, it's almost like each team had the bases loaded and they had to get out of bases loaded situation, and their pitcher was able to do it, or their defense was able to do it. But that's what I'm talking about. Aaron Jones made probably one of the pivotal plays in the game that's going to be overlooked unless you really sit down, and I'm sure the coaches spotted immediately. Aaron, if you didn't cut in, we don't have to exhaust the timeout. If you had stayed down the sidelines, even if you gave up 10 yards, we still would have had 20 seconds and a timeout, and we could have gotten maybe closer, just run the ball, because at that point, I'm saying even to myself, I'm not even looking for a touchdown. That would have been just icing on the cake. What I was looking for was just good field position for a field goal. And by having to use that timeout, rushing down to the play instead of having the ball go out of bounds or run out of bounds, it cost the Packers 3 points. And it changed the game completely around. All right, I spent a few minutes on that. That's my little analysis. And please forgive me if I go off on tangents. It's because, as I always say, it's like we're at a bar after a big softball win. We're having a hamburger, a couple of glasses of beer, and we're talking nothing but sports, and things go off on tangents for me. All right, let's get right to Ernie Banks. And here's why I have a problem with the war. Here's Duke Snyder, one of my mother-in-law's favorite. Duke, of course, with the Brooklyn Dodgers, a Hall of Fame player, no doubt, played center field, so it's one of the core 4 positions that you want. Ernie Banks, of course, the great Ernie Banks, That's a great picture of him. I do like those Cub hats. I wish they would bring them back. I don't like the serious looking Cub. I understand why Dallas Green brought those in. You know, they had the frown back in '84. I like the Cub logo from 1969. And here's a player I want to get everyone onto. I might even have to save the pitching things and just really rant about this. This is Marcus Seaman in an A's uniform. He did play the last couple of years with Toronto. I want to get into that because he typifies the WAR. But anyway, here's what I wanted to talk about with Banks. And this is why I have such a problem with WAR. And that is this. You know, Banks in 1955 was playing for a crummy team, the Chicago Cubs. And when I say crummy, yeah, they were around 500. I think they finished 77 and or they wouldn't be 150. I think they were like 73 and 84 or something because they only played 154 games then and all the rest of it. But here's the deal. As I stated, and I like to do all things, statistical. Banks had 44 home runs. Do you realize that he had more home runs than six? If you totaled up six of the other seven shortstops, he had more home runs than six of the other seven. The leading guy was Johnny Logan. All right. Johnny Logan, who had 13 homers and 83 RBIs. And Pee Wee Reese, who led, of course, was the shortstop for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He had 10 homers and 61 RBIs. Now, their WARs paled in comparison to Banks. As I said, Banks is an 8.2, and Pee Wee was 4.2, and Johnny Logan was a 6. And as I was looking, I think that was Johnny Logan's high. He's actually a pretty good player for the Milwaukee Braves. He does play on their 2 World Series teams, helps lead them to that 1 World Series championship in 1957. And of course, they lost in 58. Here's why I have a problem between Duke and Ernie Banks and why I don't understand WAR. And I'm going to even lead up to this. And that is that Banks, as I said, constituted more offense, home runs, and RBIs than Snyder, playing for an inferior team. In fact, let me just tell you this. That 55 team was miserable. Let me just get it right up here. 1955 Cubs. That Cub team was just terrible. Meanwhile, the Brooklyn Dodgers have Snyder, they have Robinson, they have Pee Wee Reese, Roy Campanella, who would win the MVP that year. You have Don Newcomb. You have some great players. Actually, I just want to be on record here, being accurate. The Cubs were actually 72, 81, and 1. Of course, we don't count the ties. They were 72 and 81, a full 9 games under 500. Ready for this? Outside of Banks, they had one other player hit 20 or more home runs. It was a player by the name of Randy Jackson who played third base. Okay? But Ernie Banks was the only guy who drove in over 100 runs. The Cubs only had 2 other players that had 60 or more RBIs on that team. D. Fondy, who was their first baseman, 1765 and 265. And again, Randy Jackson, 2170, 265. All right. They were just a mediocre team. Conversely, and this is why I have a problem. If WAR is an acronym for wins above replacement, I guess what I'm saying is you got to put it in context of the team. If you're producing, let's say, 19% of your team's offense, playing for a team that is 9 games under 500. Meanwhile, a guy who's on a World Series winning team in Duke Snyder is producing fewer. His percent is only 18.5. on a team that led the league in offense. They scored the most runs, I think, the Brooklyn Dodgers, or they were one of the top 3 teams. And this was a team. Snyder does lead the team in RBIs, 136. Okay, so he's got 19 RBIs over Banks. He's got 2 fewer home runs. He did have 6 triples, 34 doubles, and he hit 309. All right, and we'll get back to that in a second. But the Dodgers had 3 guys with over 100 RBIs. Campy, Gil Hodges, I forgot to mention him, and also Duke Snyder, plus Carl Furillo had 95. And yet, there wasn't one Cub who was even close to 90 RBIs. And yet, for some reason, here's Banks doing more with less, and Snyder doing less with more. And Snyder winds up with a better WAR that year, 8.6 to 8.2. Now, you think I'm crazy when I say this, but ready for this? Hank Aaron, okay, who was had a 6.2 WAR, and his stats kind of close, at least in terms of RBIs. His was 17.7 of the offense, and yet he finished a full 2 points below Snyder. He had a 6.2 WAR that year, and Eddie Matthews, Hank Aaron's teammate, had a 7.3 with fewer RBIs. And I'm like, and I think most baseball fans, and yes, I think even players and their agents, they probably are more aware of WAR today because they got to figure it out with their contract and their future career and where they're going to go and all the rest of it. But I can't really put really my arms around understanding fully WAR or how it's being generated. All right. I was even looking at this. Jim Rice is in the Hall of Fame. Yet he finished with a lower WAR than Fred Lynn. Even though, if you take a look at their stats, Rice is you would consider much more productive than Lynn was. Now, Lynn, if you take a look, man, he makes a ton of all-star teams before, let's say, the age of 30. And Rice makes a ton of all-star teams in his prime. Rice definitely has, in the top 3 things, home runs, RBIs, and batting average, much more consistent numbers than Fred Lynn. Actually, Fred Lynn, he has that great season in 79 where he came and he was working on a universal machine and just really hit his high for home runs with 39, ton of RBIs, great batting average. I think he led the league in batting average that year. And then he kind of falls from the precipice. He never attains those numbers again. Meanwhile, Rice continues to hit 30 and 100 and near 300 every year. Yet, Fred Lynn has a higher WAR career than Jim Rice, and Rice is in the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm not saying Rice shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, but if you're a huge Fred Lynn fan, you've got some explaining to me with the WAR, because I think everyone would probably say, and of course I'd like to see the metrics on the defense as well, that Lynn was probably the better defensive player than Rice. Why I can say that? Lynn was the center fielder, Rice the left fielder. Now, yes, playing left field in Fenway is a totally different animal than playing left field probably in any other ballpark. And Rice does become a better fielder, but the perception had always been that Rice was not the same defensive player that Lynn is. Okay, even if they're equal defensively, how does Lynn still finish ahead of him and yet not make the Hall of Fame? Not only that, but you guys have known me who have seen this show before. It still confounds me how a guy like Dick Allen has a higher WAR than those two and is not even on the list. He's never even considered anymore. And I've even said this. I'm going to put up, I just want to bring up Gary Sheffield because now I'm off on a rant. Gary Sheffield, who I said he's Richie Allen or Dick Allen twice. If you take a look, their stats are Sheffield stats are double, virtually double what Dick Allen's. His career WAR 60.5, and he won a World Series. And he did, and I always said he did get hurt with the fact that he played for a number of teams. I think that identity is important, much like Allen played for a number of teams. Fortunately for Allen, he never got into the World Series. All right, Lynn gets into one with, I do believe, one with just the Red Sox, of course, and Rice got into two, never won a World Series. But yet, here's Sheffield, who has the highest of the four of WARs, and yet nobody talks about him in terms of Hall of Fame. And his numbers are unbelievable. 500 home runs, 292 batting average, 2,600 hits, and 1,600 RBIs. They come out to 32, 105, 292. All right? Now, why do I say all this? Well, maybe I am going to get to this. I'm going to say this again. Here's Johnny Logan and Pee Wee Reese, and together they have a... Think about it this way, all right? I was, as I'm just saying this right now, and I know this is kind of crazy when I say it, together they have 23 home runs, and they have 144 RBIs and basically a 290 batting average. Banks, 44, 117, 295. So you would figure that if together they were a 10.2, you don't even think that maybe Banks, the better of the three, would have maybe a 10 WAR, but he didn't. It just confounds me why that is. Now, why I bring this up, I don't have any pictures per se of these guys, but I was looking at the greatest winners, winning pitchers. Well, here's another thing I wanted to say. So if the Hall of Fame uses WAR, and I think that the writers start to use WAR, all right, is it all about the offensive numbers? Or how much does defense play in to the overall player? Because let's face it, most of the players that are in the Hall of Fame, or the controversial ones, are offensive minded. And I'm talking about the Ralph Kiners, who got in on his, let's say, his last shot. I'm talking about really Jim Rice. All right. And yet other guys who are seen as defensive stalwarts, all right, they don't get a look sometimes. And it just boggles my mind, because baseball is the one sport where you have to play both sides of the ball. You have to be good offensively and good defensively. Now, look, in the American League, and to a certain extent in the National, you can hide maybe an offensive player who's not that good defensively by either making him a DH, a la Hal McRae, a la Jim Rice became a DH later on, or as a first baseman. All right. Now, my whole point, though, is this. If you are crediting these guys for put it this way. Lou Brock was never, and I love Lou Brock. Lou Brock was never known as a Gold Glove outfielder. Yet, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I think most people realize that he got in for his offensive achievements. Stolen bases, and really his stolen bases and what he could do on the base paths and with his bat. And I've always said he was a better hitter, definitely had more power than he ever showed, but he was more of a slap hitter. And it's too bad that, he didn't pull the ball more. But I'm just looking at these guys and I'm saying, this is not the first time, getting back to Ernie, that I feel that he's been slighted with the WAR. I did a whole thing during the summer measuring him against Orlando Cepeda, both Hall of Famers. Both had similar stats, and Cepeda finished with a 3.2 WAR, and Banks's in 1969 had a negative WAR. It boggled my mind, even though he was very productive for the Cubs, and I did basically a game-by-game breakdown of Banks and Cepeda that year, and showed how He had a number of big hits. He had a number of clutch RBIs. He did kind of, go down a little bit in the second half. So he kind of mirrored the Cubs. They were kind of mediocre in the second half. Regardless, he got them to that point. And everybody has slumps, but to finish with a negative WAR in your last great season boggles my mind. And then you'll see other players, and you say, it's crazy. All right, here's why I'm going to bring up Marcus Seaman. Ready for this? Marcus Seaman is, by every account, he is seen as an excellent ball player. He's one of those guys that, I'll just give you his numbers. He is right now, Marcus Seaman, I'm just going to my baseball reference. He's 30 years old right now. So he'll be turning 31 if the lockout ever ends. He played for the White Sox and Oakland. His baseball reference 162 game average equates to 25 home runs, 77 RBIs, 13 steals, a 256 batting average. But he draws enough walks, 62, to have a pretty good on-base percentage of .324. He has been a Gold Glove winner, a Silver Slugger, which means that he led his position in batting average and in hitting for the most part. And he did that last year, 2021. He's had 2 MVP type seasons where he played all 162 games and led the league in plate appearances in both. That was 2019 with the Oakland A's and 2021 as a member of the Blue Jays. Now, ready for this? I'm going to give you, and then you at home try to figure this out. 162 games in 2019 and 2021. Now, mind you, he finished in the MVP voting. He was third in both years that I'm talking about. In 2019, he had 747 appearances at the plate. In 2021, 724. He had at-bats, 657 in 2019, 652 in 2021. He scored 123 runs in 2019, 8 more than in 2021 when he had 115. Still incredible numbers for both. In 2019, he had 187 hits, 14 more than 2021 with 173. He had 43 doubles in 2019, 39 in 2021. Yes, he did have 7 triples in 2019, only 2 triples in 2021. In 2019, he hit 33 home runs. That's a monster year for a shortstop in any generation, in any decade, in any century. But in 2021, he had 45 round trippers. That's incredible. All right. One more than Ernie Banks in 1955. He had 92 RBIs in 2019. He had 102 in 2021, 10 more. He had stolen bases, 10 in 2019. He had 15 in 2021, 5 more. He was caught stealing 8 times in 2019. He was only caught once in 2021. He had 87 walks, by far 19 more than 2021, 66. And he did strike out more times in 2021, 146 to 102. Okay, so strikeouts don't even matter anymore. In fact, Earl Weaver said, I'd rather have a guy strike out than hit into a double play. I think it has hurt the game with the whole, the wiffle ball effect that has really started in baseball. Home run, walk, strikeout. There's not that same loss of pride by striking out, even looking. Anyway, getting back to it. He hit 285 in 2019, 20 points higher than in 2021. Now, for the baseball analytics, they will tell you batting average doesn't matter. I'm saying now batting average does matter, because you can't really have a high on-base percentage unless you have a decent batting average. Okay? And as I say, we have the Mendoza line. If a guy starts hitting, let's say 210, 220, think the Baltimore hitter right now, name escapes me, pretty soon you're on the bench because you're not producing. All right? So Marcus Seaman has a lower batting average in 2021, and his on-base percentage is lower by 35 points, 369 in 2019, 334 in 2021. But he has a higher slugging percentage in 2021, but his OPS, and really the OPS, all that is adding the batting average to the slugging percentage. I think it's not so much a useless stat, it's a redundant stat. And actually, I think it hurts, because by combining the two, you're really taking away from the slugging side of the stat. All right, because you can be a 250 hitter and have a slugging percentage of, let's say, 270, because all you do is hit singles. You could have a 250 batting average and hit 3 home runs, or hit a ton of home runs, and now your slugging percentage is 500. Who's the more valuable player? Well, again, it depends on the team, yes, and the circumstances. I get all that. But any manager in his right mind would be taking the guy who hits 250 with 30 homers rather than the guy who hits 250 that are all singles, or even a guy who hits 270 or 280 and they're all singles. Okay? Clearly, the guy who produces a run potentially every time he hits a ball once out of every 10 times is going to be more valuable. Anyway, here's the deal. Ready? Getting all to this. In 2019, and I would say, let's be fair, if I put those stats up, you'd say they're pretty even. And that's all I'm looking for right now. That the stats, yes, he's high, he's low here, he's a little bit higher here, and he's lower up here. There's a little give and take. It kind of evens out. Ready for this? Marcus Seaman's WAR in 2019 was 8.4. Great year. Unbelievable season. His WAR in 2021, 7.3. It's almost a point lower. This is where people are confused. Not only that, you can say, well, Will, he wasn't as good defensively in 2019 as he was in 2021. He won the Gold Glove this year. He won the Gold Glove this year, not in 2019. And you can say, well, the analytics with the defense is much harder to figure out. I get all that. And 9 times out of 10, you can tell whether a guy is having a good fielding year, and anybody will say, or whether a guy has really good range or not. And as I've stated here, sometimes having really fantastic range hurts your fielding percentage, because many people who score the game will say, he went all the way in the hole, and I saw him get to that ball last week and this week and field it clean and then throw the guy out. This week, almost the same exact play, and he bobbled it. So that I'm going to give him an error this time. Meanwhile, guys, you could give him a plow, and they couldn't pick up a ball to save their lives, and they will never really get hurt by errors. Or I remember if a guy has limited range, that ball that maybe a guy who has great range might bobble and get an error. The other guy simply just let it go through. It goes in for a clean hit. All right. So just figure this out. How does, and I think I will get to the pitching next week. I'll get more pictures and all the rest of it, the baseball cards, because I want to devote more time to that. Just think, though, Marcus Seaman has the same year. In fact, I'd even say this. He won the Gold Glove in 2021, and yet he finished 0.9, almost a full point below what he did in 2019 as a member of the Athletics. And the only place only a couple of places where he really outdoes. 8 more runs scored. And there are people who say they don't give a lot of tribute to runs scored as an offensive player's worth because they say somebody else has to knock you in. I disagree on that because I think there are ball players and there are metrics. You know, a guy can go from first to third, not get credit for a stolen base, but because he runs the bases so well and he has that sense of a player's, defensive player's throwing ability or his hitting ability or even the sense of how hard a ball was hit, he can determine whether I can make it to third or not. All right. So I would say this. Okay, Seaman has 8 more runs, but take a look. 12 fewer home runs in 2019. Yeah, his walks are up 19 in 2019. And his on-base percentage, 369 to 334. So here's my whole point. If WAR isn't, or if the baseball metrics don't concern themselves with batting average, and he does have a lower batting average, 265 to 285, and he does have a lower on-base percentage, I'll say it's significant, but he is producing more runs with the home runs, and he did produce more RBIs. How is there such a you would almost say, okay, maybe there might be a slight difference, maybe 8.2 to 8.1. But guys, this is a full point. That's a huge difference in WAR. All right. And this is why it still is a controversial element of metrics, because as I've stated and I've shown historically, so many times you'll see guys having similar stats and the WARs being greatly a huge difference in the WAR number. I hope I kind of informed and explained a little bit and maybe settled some of the controversy or even provoked some more issues with this episode of Park Ridge Sports History on WAR. This is Will O'Toole. Special shout out to Howard Fredericks. Thank you all. See you next week.